When a lie goes hunting for proof, the truth becomes its worst nightmare. My dear chosen ones, let that sink into your bones before we go any further. Because whether anyone ever told you or not, that is exactly what happened when they decided to run a full-scale investigation on your life. They didn't come searching for truth. They came searching for a slip, a crack, a contradiction they could cling to like a lifeline. But the moment they opened the first door, the truth stood there, waiting, unbothered, unshaken, and brighter than anything they were prepared to face. You see, chosen ones, people don't investigate what they're confident about. They investigate what intimidates them. And you, even without trying, became the kind of presence that makes insecure people itch. Why does this person stay so consistent? Why don't they break under pressure? Why aren't they reactive like the rest of us? Those questions didn't just hover in their heads, they haunted them. So they did what people always do when they're afraid of something they can't explain. They began digging. Let me rewrite the main heading for you in an idiomatic, razor-sharp way that captures exactly what unfolded. They tore your life apart, looking for skeletons, and every witness pointed to the same unbreakable backbone. That's the story they were forced to confront, whether they liked it or not. Before we move forward, chosen ones, take a moment to fuel the very engine that keeps this message alive. If this content speaks to you, strengthens you, or reminds you of who you truly are, support us by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your engagement isn't just appreciation. It's the momentum that allows us to continue creating powerful, transformative, and energizing content for you. Every like, every subscription, every share tells us that this work matters, that these messages are reaching the people who need them most. Stand with us, chosen ones. Your support keeps this movement growing. Chosen ones, picture this. Somewhere behind closed doors, people were whispering your name like it was a crime scene. Papers spread out, conversations happening in corners, your past, your interactions, your habits, all lined up on an imaginary evidence board. They went through your life like investigators combing through a rubble site, expecting to find something broken. But every piece they picked up was whole. Every witness they questioned gave the same answer. Every assumption they carried cracked under the weight of your consistency. And that's what frustrated them the most. Not that you were perfect, you never claimed to be, but that you were the same person everywhere. They couldn't twist your story because there were no loose ends to pull. They couldn't rewrite your character because every witness kept handing them the exact same paragraph. Some of them even asked themselves, how is this possible? Doesn't everyone have two faces? And the answer is yes. Everyone does, except the chosen ones. The ones who move with purpose, not performance. The ones whose truth doesn't shift, depending on the audience. The ones who stand firm even when eyes are watching, rumors are swirling, and pressure is trying to squeeze the honesty out of them. You might wonder, why would they investigate me in the first place? Why did my consistency become such a threat? Let me answer that for you directly. People don't test what they trust. They test what they fear might expose their own shortcomings. Your steadiness made them unstable. Your clarity made their motives blurry. Your ability to remain unshaken made their agendas crumble. And instead of addressing their own shadows, they assumed yours must be deeper than theirs. So they went looking. Chosen ones, your name passed through hands that hoped to find flaws. It sat in conversations dripping with doubt. Your actions were replayed and picked apart like scenes in a documentary. And yet, after all of that, nothing changed. The same truth echoed from room to room, person to person, witness to witness. You are exactly who you say you are. Those words landed heavier on them than any accusation ever could. Because now they had to face the possibility that the problem wasn't you. It was their expectation that you would eventually fall apart like they do. And here's the real twist. You didn't just survive their investigation. You unknowingly passed it with excellence. You became proof that integrity still exists in a world addicted to facades. Your life became a mirror, forcing them to see their own contradictions, their own insecurities, their own unstable identities. They wanted dirt. They found discipline. They wanted scandal. They found structure. They wanted a mask. They found a mirror. Chosen ones, this isn't just an introduction. It's a reminder of what happens when truth walks confidently into a room that expected deception. It's a reminder of your power, the power of being chosen not because of attention, but because of alignment. And it's the very reason their investigation fell apart while your character stood tall. Now, let's peel back the layers of what they found, what they feared, and why every witness became an unexpected defender of your truth. Chosen ones, before we step deeper into this revelation, pause for a moment and anchor yourself in this space. Your presence here isn't accidental. It's part of the very pattern they tried to decode. If this message already resonates with the investigation you've lived through, show your strength by liking this video, subscribing, and leaving a 77 in the comments so we know you're one of the rare ones who recognizes these signs in your own life. Your support keeps this movement alive and allows us to bring you more content that exposes the truth they hoped you'd never discover. And now, let's step into the next layer of this story, piece by piece. Because if you truly are among the chosen ones, you're about to realize that what every witness said about you isn't just familiar. It's the exact pattern you've been living all along. Let's begin. Number 1. The consistency they searched for became the truth they couldn't escape. They looked for your mask and realized you never wore one to begin with. Nothing frightens a pretender more than someone who is real all the time. My dear chosen ones, breathe that in for a moment, because when they launched that investigation into your life, when they pulled files, whispered your name, replayed your decisions like surveillance footage, they were convinced they'd uncover a hidden version of you. They were sure you had a mask tucked away somewhere, a second face you only wore in the shadows. But instead of exposing you, they exposed something far more disturbing to them. You had nothing to hide in the first place. And that, chosen ones, is what shook them to their core. Let me rewrite this in an idiomatic, sharper way that mirrors the truth they stumbled into. They went fishing for a double life and ended up choking on the simplicity of your truth. Because you weren't juggling identities like the rest of the world. You weren't switching tones for convenience or adjusting your morals based on audience. They sifted through every version of you they could find, public, private, past, present, and it all matched, perfectly, painfully, consistently. This level of consistency isn't normal to them. It's threatening. Chosen ones understand something crucial. Most people walk around like unfinished puzzles. A piece for work, a piece for family, a piece for strangers. A piece they pray no one ever discovers. They expected you to be the same, fragmented, inconsistent, compartmentalized. They believed that if they looked closely enough, pressed hard enough, or dug deep enough, they'd find the cracks. But all they found was clarity. That clarity disoriented them. It made them feel like they were the ones under the microscope, because when someone is authentically themselves at all times, it forces pretenders to confront just how many versions of themselves they've created to survive. You weren't quiet around certain people and loud around others. You weren't kind only when it benefited you. You weren't one person in the daylight and another after the door closed. Your character didn't fluctuate with environment. It held steady like a compass that doesn't care who's holding it. And chosen ones, that's exactly what made them uncomfortable. Because authenticity is dangerous to those who rely on manipulation. It can't be bribed, it can't be pressured, it can't be redirected by emotional games or guilt traps. When someone like you walks into a room, people who depend on masks feel stripped of theirs. At this point, you might ask yourself, why did my consistency bother them so much? Why would being the same person everywhere make them dig deeper? Let me answer that directly, because people who build their lives on performance can't comprehend someone whose identity isn't an act. They assumed your honesty was a strategy, your transparency a trick, your steadiness a calculated plan. They kept waiting for the reveal, the slip-up, the moment your real self would surface. What they didn't understand is that your real self was always the one standing right in front of them. Witnesses confirmed it repeatedly. Friends, co-workers, acquaintances, even people who barely interacted with you. Everyone described the same person, the same tone, the same integrity, the same energy. And each repeated truth tightened the noose around their assumptions. Chosen ones, nothing terrifies someone with shifting faces more than meeting someone with one face they can't dissect. By the end of their investigation, their biggest revelation wasn't your hidden secrets, it was your lack of them. They discovered something they never expected to confront: the rare, almost unsettling power of someone who doesn't bend themselves to fit the room, someone who doesn't perform, someone who doesn't hide. They couldn't manipulate it, they couldn't reframe it, they couldn't twist it into something scandalous. So they did the only thing left. They backed away from the truth they couldn't challenge. Chosen ones understand this clearly. Your greatest threat to them was never a flaw. It was your flawless consistency. The very thing they hoped would expose you ended up confirming your authenticity instead. And nothing, absolutely nothing, rattles an unstable crowd like someone who shows up as the same person every single time. Now, chosen ones, let's move deeper, because this is only the first truth they couldn't escape. Number 2, pressure didn't break you. It exposed everyone who expected you to fold. They turned up the pressure and watched you turn into someone they couldn't break. My dear chosen ones, here's a quote to carve into the minds of anyone who ever tried to test your limits. Pressure doesn't create your character, it reveals it. And what it revealed about you terrified them. When they conducted that investigation on your life, they were certain pressure would be the tool that finally cracked you open. They believed scrutiny would make you stumble, observation would make you nervous, and relentless monitoring would force you into mistakes they could twist into evidence. They were counting on your collapse. They were waiting for that moment when your composure would melt under the heat they thought you couldn't withstand. But chosen ones, every witness said the same thing: your collapse never came. Instead, the more they cornered you, the clearer you became. Where others would have panicked, you sharpened. Where most people would have spiraled into emotional chaos, your mind cut through the noise with precision. Every witness reported that under pressure, you didn't just remain stable, you became almost frighteningly accurate. Your decisions grew cleaner, your judgment tightened, your voice steadied, your presence solidified into something unmovable. And that's when they realized their biggest miscalculation. Pressure doesn't break someone like you, it activates you. Chosen ones, understand this. Some people thrive only when circumstances are comfortable, predictable, and controlled. But you carry a different wiring. You gain clarity under fire. Your instincts get sharper in chaos. The very situations designed to expose your weakness end up highlighting your strength. Witnesses described it in ways they struggled to articulate. They watched you face contradictions, traps, lies, accusations, and attempts to provoke you emotionally. They waited for an outburst, a rash reaction, a slip of the tongue. They needed something, anything they could point to as proof that you were losing control. But you didn't react the way they expected. You analyzed, you assessed, you responded with surgical precision that cut through their narrative like a scalpel through fabric. Your calm wasn't passive, it was intentional. Your silence wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. Your stillness wasn't fear, it was control. And chosen ones, this is what shook them quietly. Because pressure breaks most people. It exposes their impulsiveness, their emotional fragility, their lack of inner structure. But when pressure was applied to you, it didn't reveal chaos, it revealed discipline. Imagine their confusion. They built a whole investigation around the belief that if they just pushed hard enough, your real weakness would surface. Instead, what surfaced was their own. Your clarity exposed their impatience. Your composure exposed their instability. Your precision exposed their sloppiness. Every witness echoed the same truth. Not one contradiction, not one crack, not one moment where you lost yourself. And that consistency became the evidence they feared the most. You might wonder, why did my strength under pressure bother them? Why did it unsettle them instead of impressing them? Let me speak directly to you, chosen one. Because people who rely on manipulation depend entirely on other people's emotional reactions. When someone refuses to break, refuses to be baited, refuses to crumble, it dismantles the manipulator's entire strategy. Your calm didn't just confuse them, it took away their power. They realized there was no angle to exploit, no weakness to weaponize. They couldn't provoke you. They couldn't derail you. They couldn't bend you. They discovered something unnerving. Cornering you was impossible. By the end of the investigation, witnesses weren't talking about your flaws. They were talking about how you became stronger the more the pressure increased. They described your mind working with a clarity that made others uncomfortable because it forced them to confront their own lack of composure. You didn't just survive scrutiny, you mastered it, and that mastery made you stand apart from everyone else involved. Chosen ones, hear this clearly. Pressure didn't break you. It exposed the fact that you were built differently. Your strength was not loud, not boastful, not aggressive. It was sharper, a quiet, calculated, undeniable precision. And that is why every witness told the same story. That is why they will never forget you. Because while they tried to shake you, all they did was reveal how unshakable you truly are. Now, chosen ones, let's move to the next truth they could not ignore. Number 3. Your calm wasn't silence. It was a firewall they couldn't breach. They thought you were unbothered, but you were operating on a level they couldn't reach. Silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of someone who refuses to be controlled. My dear chosen ones, this is where the investigation took a turn they never saw coming. Because when they began watching you, when they monitored your reactions, studied your expressions, and waited for the slightest emotional slip, they assumed your calm meant you were passive. They thought your silence was a sign of fear or confusion or some hidden vulnerability they could exploit. They mistook your stillness for emptiness. They misread your lack of response as lack of strength. But what they didn't understand, chosen ones, is that your calm was never a void. It was a barricade, a decision, a strategy, a deliberate line drawn so cleanly that nothing chaotic, manipulative, or malicious could cross it. They thought you didn't react because you were unbothered. The truth was far more unsettling. You didn't react because you refused to hand them even an inch of control. When the witnesses were questioned, they all described the same thing: your emotional independence. You didn't get pulled into conversations designed to provoke you. You didn't respond to rumors crafted to corner you. You didn't let someone's tone, accusation, or insecurity dictate your behavior. Instead, you stayed in a place they couldn't access. And chosen ones, that's the power they never accounted for. Because the moment they realized they couldn't manipulate you, they also realized they couldn't predict you. And unpredictable people terrify manipulators. Why? Because their entire strategy depends on your emotional reactions. They need you flustered so they can steer your decisions. They need you defensive so they can rewrite your narrative. They need you emotional so they can weaponize your words. But when it came to you, chosen ones, every tactic fell flat. Every attempt to rattle you only revealed how steady you already were. They tried to bait you with subtle insults, but you didn't bite. They tried to corner you with drama, but you didn't step into the room. They tried to mislead you with gossip, but you remained unmoved. Little did they know, your silence wasn't hiding something, it was preventing something, their access. Chosen ones, understand this clearly. Emotional unavailability to manipulation is not the same as not caring. It is a sign of mastery. It is the refusal to be controlled by someone else's expectations, moods, games, or ego. And this is what the investigation confirmed. Witness after witness said you weren't distant, you were selective. You weren't cold, you were discerning. You weren't ignoring people, you were preserving your energy for what actually mattered. And that, right there, is what unsettled them most. They expected to find openings in your behavior, little cracks they could pry apart. Instead, they found a wall, smooth, intentional, unscalable. A structure built long before their investigation began. They thought they were examining you. Instead, they ran into the architecture of your boundaries. You might wonder, chosen ones, why did my silence bother them more than speaking up ever would? Here's why. Silence removes their leverage. Silence breaks their script. Silence forces them to face themselves. Silence makes their manipulation echo back at them with no landing place. Your silence was not emptiness, it was consequence, and they felt every ounce of it. As they reviewed witness accounts, a pattern emerged so consistent they couldn't escape it. You didn't waste time defending yourself. You didn't explain your intentions. You didn't fight battles beneath your level. Every time someone pushed you, your response was the same: disengagement. Calm, controlled, complete disengagement. The kind of response that shows you're not running from anything. You're simply denying them access to influence your state of mind. By the end of their investigation, they realized something they were never prepared to face. You weren't unbothered. You were unreachable, strategically unavailable, emotionally sovereign. Your mental space wasn't something people could invade. Your focus wasn't something they could redirect. Your energy wasn't something they could drain. And that truth, more than anything else, left them powerless. Because you weren't resisting their manipulation. You were immune to it. Chosen ones, let that settle deep in your spirit. This wasn't just a part of the investigation. It was one of the biggest revelations they stumbled into. They didn't uncover your weakness. They uncovered your independence. And nothing terrifies a manipulator more than a chosen one who refuses to be controlled. Now, let's move to the next truth they couldn't deny. Number 4. Your boundaries weren't drawn in reaction. They were etched in your DNA. My dear chosen ones, let this truth hit with the force it deserves. People who lack self-control always accuse discipline of being disrespect. That's why your boundaries rattled them long before they ever admitted it. They weren't just lines you drew in the heat of conflict. They weren't walls you built after being hurt. They weren't emotional reactions thrown together at the last minute. No, your boundaries were older than the situations that tested them. They were etched into you long before anyone tried to cross them, long before anyone attempted to reshape your identity for their convenience. And this is exactly where the investigation into your life took a sharp, unexpected turn. They walked in assuming your boundaries were temporary, that they were flexible, that with enough pressure or manipulation they could convince you to bend. They expected you to crack, adjust, or accommodate the moment they leaned against your principles. But what they didn't understand, chosen ones, is that your boundaries were not designed as barricades. They were designed as architecture, your architecture, the blueprint of who you are. They didn't realize they were dealing with someone whose limits weren't created out of fear, but out of clarity. So when they started questioning witnesses, people who knew you well, people who barely knew you, people who met you only once, they expected to hear stories about you being defensive, reactive, or rigid. Instead, they heard something entirely different, something they never prepared themselves for: consistency. Witness after witness confirmed the same truth. They didn't observe you drawing boundaries in moments of chaos. They observed you living by boundaries long before chaos ever arrived. Chosen ones, this is what separates you from the crowd. Most people set boundaries only when they're desperate, when something goes wrong, when they're backed into a corner and finally forced to protect themselves. But you functioned from standards. Your life wasn't shaped by emotional emergencies, it was built by principles. And people who move without principles can't comprehend someone who lives with them so naturally. You might wonder, why did my boundaries threaten them? Why did something so personal become a point of investigation? Here's your answer. Boundaries reveal hierarchy. They expose who controls the situation and who doesn't. And your boundaries made something uncomfortably clear. You weren't living according to other people's expectations. They had no access to your emotional switches, no influence over your reactions, no leverage over your decisions. You weren't governed by their approval, their disapproval, or their tactics. You were governed by your internal blueprint, and that alone stripped them of any illusion of control. During the investigation, every attempt to reinterpret your boundaries as arrogance fell apart. Witnesses didn't describe you as defensive. They described you as deliberate, not reactive, structured, not guarded, self-respecting. They told story after story of you walking away from situations that didn't match your values, not because you were angry or impulsive, but because you had already decided the standards you lived by. You weren't navigating life through trial and error. You were navigating through clarity. And clarity terrifies people who survive on chaos. The investigation exposed something they were never prepared to confront. They weren't dealing with someone who creates boundaries as needed. They were dealing with someone whose boundaries were built in, like instinct, quiet, unwavering, and immovable. They discovered that your boundaries weren't formed by circumstances. They were formed by identity. Chosen ones, this was the moment the investigators realized something humbling. The limits you lived by were not designed to keep people out. They were designed to keep your integrity intact. They couldn't twist it, couldn't weaponize it, couldn't use it to paint you as difficult or closed off. Every witness aligned with the same message. You didn't enforce boundaries because someone provoked you. You enforced them because that's who you are. And that, chosen ones, is why this revelation hit them harder than anything else. Because how do you manipulate someone whose boundaries cannot be negotiated? How do you control someone who already knows where the line is before you ever approach it? How do you shake someone who is rooted, not reacting? You don't. You can't. And they couldn't. This was the point where the investigation flipped. They began to realize that these weren't boundaries they could cross. They were foundations they had no authority to challenge. They expected weakness and found structure. They expected cracks and found bedrock. They expected someone they could push and found someone who couldn't be moved. Your boundaries weren't reactions, they were identity. And that truth, chosen ones, was the one revelation they never recovered from. Whenever you're ready, send the next point. Number 5. Your refusal to retaliate revealed a strength they never saw coming. They poked, pushed, and provoked. And your refusal to strike back became the loudest blow of all. My dear chosen ones, listen closely. because this revelation didn't just unsettle them, it demolished the entire strategy they built around your supposed weakness. They expected you to retaliate. They counted on it. They believed that sooner or later you would lash out, slip up, or hand them the very ammunition they needed to drag your name through the mud. But what they never accounted for was the quiet, unshakable truth inside you. Chosen ones don't swing back to prove who they are. They stand still and let the truth expose itself. When you refuse to play their game, you don't lose. You end the game entirely. This is the quote that hit them harder than anything you could have ever said out loud. Because chosen ones, let's be brutally clear, retaliation was the reaction they were banking on. It was the fuel they needed to justify their suspicions and manufacture a narrative that would make them feel powerful again. And when you refused to give them what they came for, you didn't just stay calm. You defeated them without throwing a single punch. You see, when they conducted that full investigation on you, they wanted to find anger, resentment, bitterness, something reactive that they could twist into a story. They wanted a meltdown, a rant, a confrontation, anything they could use to make you look unstable or emotional. Instead, every witness they interviewed described the same thing. You remained composed, you stayed grounded, and you didn't bend yourself to meet anyone's chaos. And that, chosen ones, is rare. Almost unnervingly rare. Let me tell you why this shook them so deeply. Most people, when pushed, snap. They respond to insult with insult, attack with attack. That's human nature, or at least the nature most people live by. But you operate on a different frequency entirely. Your silence wasn't avoidance. It was precision. Your restraint wasn't fear. It was sight. Clear, sharp sight. You understood exactly what they were trying to provoke, and you refused to dance for their advantage. Chosen ones, ask yourself this. Why would someone who knows their worth waste energy proving it to people who are committed to misunderstanding it? Exactly. You didn't need revenge to feel powerful. Your existence, your growth, your consistency, those were enough. And that's why they panicked. Because the moment they realized you weren't reacting, they were forced to confront a truth they weren't prepared for. Your value wasn't tied to their approval or their lies. You weren't trying to win them over, argue with them, or outshout their accusations. You simply continued living in a way that contradicted every rumor they tried to create. And that kind of contradiction, silent, steady, undeniable, hits harder than any retaliation ever could. Witness after witness said the same thing. Where others would have erupted, you didn't flinch. Where others would have fought back, you moved forward. Where others would have wasted their energy trying to reclaim dignity, yours never left you to begin with. Your restraint forced them to see their own intentions clearly. Your silence acted like a spotlight on their behavior. Your refusal to retaliate made them question why they were attacking someone who wasn't even participating in the fight. And, chosen ones, that's the moment everything flipped. They realized you weren't avoiding conflict because you were afraid. You were avoiding conflict because you were above it. You weren't losing ground. You were refusing to step into their mess. You weren't ignoring them. You were prioritizing your peace. Your decision not to strike back wasn't passive. It was the sharpest form of power, because nothing destroys a manipulator faster than a target who won't play their game. When the investigation concluded, they had no choice but to accept what every witness already knew. You don't chase revenge because you don't need validation. Your life is the evidence. Your actions are the proof. Your forward motion is the verdict. And in the end, their greatest shock wasn't that you stayed silent. It was that your silence spoke louder than any retaliation ever could. Your lack of revenge didn't make you look weak. It exposed the weakness in everyone who tried to provoke you. Chosen ones, they thought they could break you by pushing you. They didn't realize you're the kind of force that becomes even more unshakable in stillness. Now they know. And nothing unsettles an enemy more than realizing the power they were trying to attack was never in their reach to begin with. Number 6. Even your critics had no choice but to respect the precision of your character. Even your critics had to bow to the truth of who you are. My dear chosen ones, here's a quote to carve into the minds of anyone who ever tried to rewrite your story. The loudest enemies often become the quietest witnesses when the truth stands taller than their opinions. Nothing hits harder than realizing that the very people who wanted to discredit you ended up confirming your strength instead. And during the investigation they launched, this deep, intrusive attempt to unravel your character, this is exactly what happened. They thought calling in your critics would bury you. Instead, those critics unintentionally built the strongest case in your favor. Imagine the scene, chosen ones. They lined up everyone who had ever disagreed with you, everyone who misunderstood you, everyone who had a reason, real or imagined, to paint you in a negative light. They expected fireworks, contradictions, emotional storytelling, accusations they could weaponize. But what they received instead was something they were absolutely unprepared for. Respect. Genuine, reluctant, undeniable respect. Respect from people who didn't even like you. Do you understand how powerful that is? When supporters praise you, it's expected. When friends defend you, it's natural. But when people who have no reason to protect you still acknowledge your integrity, your intelligence, and your unshakable principles, that carries weight that can't be bought, faked, or manipulated. Chosen ones, this kind of respect is a rare currency because it isn't rooted in affection, it's rooted in truth. The investigators sat there stunned as witness after witness, some with old grudges, some with personal differences, some who openly disliked you, said the same thing. You are consistent, you are fair, you are honest, you are principled. They didn't sugarcoat, they didn't pretend to admire you, they simply could not deny what was real. And that's what made the people conducting the investigation incredibly uncomfortable. They were counting on your detractors to tear you apart. Instead, your detractors drew the outline of someone they could neither distort nor discredit. Even when they tried to criticize you, their criticism had limits. They would begin with a complaint, but every complaint ended the same way. But to be fair, and fairness is something manipulators cannot twist. Chosen ones, let me be direct. When even your enemies are on the same page about your character, that's when the investigation collapses. Because how do you manipulate a narrative when no one, friend or foe, is willing to lie for you or against you? They expected people to create chaos in your story. Instead, they created confirmation. You never shifted your personality to gain approval. You never watered down your standards to please a crowd. You never changed your principles to avoid conflict. That made you unpredictable to some and admirable to others, but most importantly, it made you undeniable. Here's the part they never anticipated. Your critics respected you because you never played the social games they relied on. You didn't chase popularity. You didn't rely on charm. You didn't need applause. You moved through your life anchored in authenticity, and authenticity forces acknowledgement, even from those who wish you weren't so unshakable. Chosen ones, do you know how unsettling that is for people who built their influence on perception? When they realized they couldn't intimidate you, couldn't manipulate you, couldn't distort the truth, because even your detractors validated your character, the entire investigation lost its foundation. The people examining you realized something uncomfortable. They were dealing with someone who doesn't derive power from approval, but from alignment. Your actions matched your words. Your principles matched your decisions. Your presence matched your identity. That kind of alignment is rare. Rare enough to be respected. Rare enough to be feared. rare enough to dismantle every narrative they tried to construct. By the end of it all, the investigators faced a truth they couldn't escape. Your influence wasn't built on charm, it was built on authenticity. Your presence didn't demand respect, it earned it, even from those who didn't like you. Your life didn't need defenders. It defended itself through the testimony of people who had no reason to protect you. Chosen ones, that is the level of power you carry. And when they realized that even your enemies couldn't rewrite your truth, the investigation didn't just end, it unraveled. Because nothing threatens manipulators more than someone whose reputation is so solid that even those who disagree with them are forced to say, "This person is real." Number 7. You moved by inner compass, leaving external opinions powerless. They tried to pull your strings and discovered you're not wired for their approval. Nothing terrifies a manipulator more than a person who can't be swayed by applause or shaken by criticism. My dear chosen ones, this part of the investigation hit them harder than any other revelation. Because somewhere deep in their strategy, they were convinced that you, like most people, could be steered, nudged, or reshaped by external validation. They thought all they had to do was push the right emotional button, and you would bend to their narrative. But when they began questioning witnesses, studying your patterns, and dissecting your decisions, the truth that emerged left them stunned. You don't move for approval. You move for truth, your truth. And that alone dismantled their entire plan. Chosen ones, understand this. The world is full of people who perform. People who shift their tone depending on the room, who adjust their values depending on who's watching, who respond not from intention but from insecurity. These people are easy to manipulate, easy to predict, easy to control. That's what the investigators expected from you. They thought you were just another person waiting for validation, waiting for approval, waiting for someone to tell you how to feel, act, or respond. But every witness said the same thing. You are governed by your own internal compass, steady, private, and untouchable. This discovery unsettled them deeply. Because when someone can't be bribed with praise or cornered with criticism, they become impossible to influence. You became a puzzle with pieces they couldn't rearrange. They tried charm to pull you closer. They tried gossip to push you off balance. They tried subtle intimidation to steer your reactions. They tried misinformation to provoke emotional responses. And still, nothing changed, nothing shifted. You didn't waver. This is when they realized they weren't dealing with someone powered by public opinion. They were dealing with someone powered by personal principle, someone whose decisions come from inside, not from the noise of the outside world, someone who doesn't crumble when criticized or inflate when praised, someone who understands that applause is temporary, but integrity is permanent. Chosen ones, internal truth is one of the rarest forms of strength. Most people spend their entire lives trying to impress others, perform for approval, or become whatever version of themselves gets the most applause. You, on the other hand, have been walking through life with a quiet conviction that doesn't need an audience. That independence makes you unpredictable. Not because you're chaotic, but because you're unmoved by the usual emotional levers people depend on. Witness after witness described the same pattern. You don't mirror the room, you anchor it. You don't shift to fit in, you remain who you are. You don't chase validation, you create your own standard. What they discovered is that your life isn't a performance. It's a reflection of principles they can't manipulate, values they can't dilute, and clarity they can't distort. Your truth doesn't adjust based on who approves of it. Your choices don't change depending on who claps. Your reactions aren't shaped by who's watching. And that realization made them uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Because influence only works on people who need something from the crowd. But you, chosen one, need nothing outside of your own alignment. Your direction isn't chosen for you, it's chosen by you. That is why attempts to control you collapsed before they even began. They were using tools that simply don't work on someone like you. Think of it like this. They were trying to steer a ship that already had its coordinates locked on an internal compass they couldn't access. No matter how hard they tried to redirect the waves around you, your course didn't change. You moved with intention, with precision, with an unwavering sense of self that left them feeling powerless. That kind of independence is magnetic to those who admire strength, and maddening to those who depend on weakness to gain control. It's a warning signal to manipulators everywhere. You cannot move someone who is rooted in self-truth. By the time their investigation concluded, they had no choice but to accept the truth. You operate on a wavelength beyond their influence. Your internal truth is your guide, your guardrail, and your anchor. You exist outside their emotional reach, and that reality alone is enough to shake anyone who underestimated the quiet power of a chosen one. Number 8. You didn't enter their drama. You disconnected and left it starving. They realized you don't gossip. You disconnect, and that made you untouchable. Chosen ones, this part of the investigation shook them more than anything else. Because when they dug into your conversations, your interactions, your habits, they expected to find you tangled in the usual webs, whisper circles, reactive exchanges, heated back and forths, petty narratives. They expected you to slip the way ordinary people do when the room gets noisy. But instead of catching you in drama, they ran into something far more disarming. Your silence was intentional, your distance was deliberate, and your refusal to engage in meaningless talk made you a ghost in every petty battlefield they thought you'd fight on. They discovered quickly that you don't gossip, you disconnect, and nothing is more terrifying to those who rely on chaos than someone who simply steps out of the arena altogether. Chosen ones, listen closely. Gossip is the fuel weak people burn to feel powerful. But you don't run on that cheap fuel. You don't need attention, alliances, or whispered secrets to validate your existence. While the world thrives on noise, you were built for clarity. And clarity cannot survive in rooms filled with distortion, exaggeration, and manipulation. So instead of playing their game, you walked away from the board entirely. Imagine their confusion. They tried to pull you into emotional traps. They tried to bait you into reacting. They tried to twist situations so you'd defend yourself, argue, or reveal something they could weaponize. But instead of taking the bait, you simply disconnected. Cleanly. Completely. Without theatrics, without explanation. Your silence wasn't avoidance, it was strategy. During the investigation, witness after witness described your behavior with the same almost unsettling accuracy. They said you never twisted stories, you never added spice to a rumor, you never took the bait when someone tried to provoke you. You didn't get dragged into emotional tug-of-wars, you didn't add your voice to the noise, and you never let anyone use your words as ammunition. This shocked them, chosen ones, because people who rely on gossip expect everyone to crumble under social pressure. They expect fear, insecurity, or curiosity to make people talk. But you had no appetite for it. You weren't hungry for chaos. You weren't thirsty for attention. While everyone else was drowning in emotional entanglements, you remained dry, calm, and observant. They saw that your absence from drama was not coldness. It was discipline. The kind of discipline that reveals a person who knows exactly what energy costs, where it should be spent, and how much must be protected. You weren't avoiding confrontation. You were avoiding contamination. And chosen ones, that's what unsettled them the most. Because gossip is the most common weapon of the insecure, and when it didn't work on you, they realized something frightening. They couldn't reach you emotionally. They couldn't push you into the darkness they operate from. They couldn't use your voice as a tool because your voice wasn't available to them in the first place. They discovered that your silence cuts deeper than any argument. Your distance speaks louder than retaliation. Your refusal to engage sends a clearer message than any confrontation ever could. You didn't gossip because it was beneath you. You disconnected because your mind requires clarity, and clarity cannot coexist with noise. Chosen ones, not everyone will understand the power of withdrawal. Some think silence is weakness. But those who truly observe you, the investigators, the witnesses, the ones who tried to challenge you, learned the hard way that your silence is a fortress. It protects your future, shields your energy, and keeps you from becoming collateral in battles that were never meant for you. Every witness confirmed it. Your disengagement wasn't passive. It was almost surgical. You didn't slam doors. You didn't explode. You simply stepped away from anything that didn't align with truth, peace, or growth. And that made you impossible to manipulate. By the end of the investigation, the conclusion was unavoidable. You are untouchable, not because you hide, but because you refuse to dirty your hands in chaos. Your strength doesn't lie in how loudly you speak, but in what you refuse to participate in. You don't just avoid drama, you starve it. And nothing is more dangerous to people who thrive on chaos than someone who cuts off their supply without saying a single word. Chosen ones, this is why they felt powerless. This is why they felt exposed. And this is why they couldn't twist your story, because you never gave them anything to twist. You aren't just quiet, you are unreachable, unshakable, and entirely outside their grasp. Now, chosen ones, let's move to the next truth they never expected to uncover. Number 9. Your silence wasn't absence. It was a strategy that outplayed them all. Your silence hit harder than any words they hoped to use against you. Silence is a weapon only the disciplined can wield. Everyone else mistakes it for surrender until it slices through their intentions. My dear chosen ones, understand this. When they conducted that full investigation on you, when they dissected your every move and monitored your every reaction, one thing rattled them more than anything else: your silence. Not the absence of words, but the mastery of them. They expected to hear explanations, defenses, long speeches, or emotional slips they could twist into evidence. But the moment they were met with your strategic quiet, something inside their plans cracked. They realized that you weren't silent because you lacked words. You were silent because you understood the power of choosing when to use them. Chosen ones, silence is the language of people who know their worth. And during that investigation, every witness confirmed the same unsettling truth. Your silence was not passive, not timid, not withdrawn. It was intentional. It was methodical. It was the kind of silence that makes unsteady people confront their own noise. They thought staying quiet would make you vulnerable. They didn't realize it made them exposed. Witnesses described you as the type who speaks only when the message matters. You don't fill space with unnecessary words. You don't defend yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't waste breath explaining truth to those who benefit from distorting it. Instead, you protect your future from the contamination of meaningless conflict. And that, chosen ones, is exactly what left them unsettled. Because silence, true, disciplined silence, isn't about hiding. It's about seeing. And you saw everything. You saw the games, the angles, the traps they quietly set. You saw the bait they dangled, expecting you to lunge at it emotionally. You saw the narrative they hoped you would fall into so they could twist your words and weaponize them. But instead of reacting, you watched, you observed. You let them reveal themselves piece by piece while you preserved your energy like someone who knows their future is too important to squander on temporary noise. This is where chosen ones differ from ordinary people. ordinary people talk to soothe their anxiety. Chosen ones understand that every unnecessary word is a doorway for manipulation. So instead of stepping into their trap, you stood still, calm, composed, unshaken, while they became increasingly frantic, trying to provoke you into a reaction. Chosen ones, your silence didn't just protect you, it exposed them. Every time they tried to corner you, your quiet reflection of their behavior made them look at themselves. Every time they attempted to mislead you, your refusal to react forced them to reveal their hand too early. Every time they pushed for a verbal misstep, your composed stillness reminded them that you cannot be outmaneuvered by someone whose strategy relies on chaos. Your silence was the mirror they never wanted to look into. And the deeper the investigation went, the more this truth echoed through every witness. You silence with purpose. You pause with intention. You protect your path by refusing to let temporary drama stain the long-term story of your life. This level of restraint confused them. People who rely on manipulation don't understand someone who won't play the game. They thought your quiet moments indicated fear. What they didn't realize was that you were simply giving the truth enough space to reveal itself without your interference. Chosen ones don't rush to respond because they know that time is the greatest ally of truth. By the end of the investigation, the verdict was undeniable. Your silence is armor. It doesn't shield your pride. It safeguards your future. It doesn't hide weakness. It broadcasts discipline. It doesn't conceal guilt, it reveals clarity. And that clarity shook them, because they learned the hard way that the person who speaks less is often the person who has already seen more. They discovered that you weren't avoiding confrontation, you were choosing battles they could never win. They realized that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding the sharpest understanding. Chosen ones, your silence wasn't submission. It was strategy, it was strength, it was self-control they could neither imitate nor influence. And that truth, your truth, left a mark on that investigation that no one involved could ever forget. When you're ready, provide the next section and I'll craft it into the next hard-hitting chapter. And now, chosen ones, as we close this chapter of the investigation they never expected to backfire, let this truth settle deeply. Your silence, your consistency, your strategy, none of it was accidental. It was the very evidence that proved who you are. If this resonated with you, show your strength by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and dropping 77 in the comments so we know you stand among the chosen ones who recognize these patterns in their own lives. And share this message with someone who needs the reminder, your truth has power far beyond this moment.